Amid all of the electoral business happening, both in terms of primary and caucus elections, as well as, of course, the Supreme Court decision in the Colorado ballot access case that came down yesterday, 9-zip, that we've been discussing all morning. What's gotten lost a bit is the impeachment inquiry into Biden Incorporated, the big guy, Mr. 10%, President Biden, and baby boy Hunter's testimony behind closed doors, transcript released. Matt Gaetz, congressman from Florida, was on with Hannity last night talking a bit about it because he and Hunter Biden, per the transcript, had some interesting exchanges. And I thought Gaetz did a nice job of summarizing what is revealed in the transcript, that there's two Hunter Bidens. There's a bit of a Jekyll and Hyde situation with Hunter Biden. There's the Hunter Biden who's cutting the deals, and then there's the Hunter Biden who is texting family members about the particulars of those deals, complaining about having to pay bills and those sorts of things.
Whenever he's getting paid, he suggests that he's a brilliant lawyer, a financial wizard, a man about Washington. But whenever he's demanding payment, and that's where you see the references to Joe Biden, the shakedowns, the threats, well, then he can't be responsible for his actions because he's just a drug-addled fool. And so I wanted to drill into precisely when Joe Biden and Hunter Biden were using this drug-induced defense for really what is a bribe that is dressed up in drag and masquerading around as a business transaction. And the fact that the Chinese are now saying this wasn't a business transaction, there was no work done, that only reinforces the concept that this was a bribe the whole time.
Yeah, and point of fact, what Gaetz is referencing is that the $1 million that Hunter was paid by this Chi-Com-backed energy company, CEFC, Dr. Patrick Ho is threatening to sue Hunter Biden within a week unless he gets his money back because he claims Hunter did no legal work for him. See what happens when you get in bed with the Chi-Coms that have political interests at heart and are using a doofus, a useful idiot like you, Hunter, for access as well as to manipulate as they see fit as needs arise in one direction or the other? For more on this, because I don't know what the appetite is for this impeachment inquiry, pushing this on Biden Inc., continuing to connect the dots. We had James Biden concede, same thing under oath, that, the 40 grand I paid the big guy did come from money that made its way to me from Hunter from China. Well, okay, well, that's sort of what we're talking about, that this was never about Hunter, except Hunter as the conduit to unjustly enrich Joe Biden, who is at the top of the pyramid of this influence peddling scheme. So that was sort of a major concession that didn't get much coverage and hasn't really gotten much talk from even conservatives. Anyway, let's get some legal perspective on this. Please be joined by Joseph Moreno, former federal prosecutor with the Department of Justice in the National Security Division. He's also a former staff member with the FBI's 9/11 Review Commission, and he's a U.S. Army combat veteran. Joseph Moreno, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Dan, good morning. Good to be with you.
Good to have you. So, your perspective on some of the things, well, sort of the two Hunter Bidens approach that Hunter took, as well as the admission by James, something we already knew to be true, but it's always nice to have it confirmed by a principal party.
Sure. Well, when it comes to something like this, you have to kind of look at it in two lenses, right? There's the purely criminal lens, right? Are there criminal acts here that could subject one or more persons to prosecution? I'm not sure we're there. Whether you could say it's a bribe, influence peddling, bribery is surprisingly difficult to prosecute. So I'm not sure we're there. Now, the other lens is impeachment. And impeachment is a political process. Even though it references high crimes and misdemeanors, we've all heard that. But the fact is, Congress can impeach a president for more or less anything it wants. The lower standard. So in that case, Congress, which has done a good job fleshing out the sort of Biden brand influence peddling operation, they can certainly take it and run with it. They don't need to prove bribery as you would in a court of law. And there's certainly enough here that they can say, look, the Bidens brought in millions of dollars in exchange for what seems like nothing more than putting Joe Biden's influence out there. And at the same time, there's nothing that was provided. I mean, Hunter Biden says he was a great lawyer and a brilliant guy, but the fact is he wasn't practicing law. He's not an expert on energy matters. So again, it's just really what he was selling in exchange for millions of dollars was basically the promise that his father could intervene if necessary.
I understand, but there's a political import to proving unjust enrichment and bribery, and and obviously, if you could connect a payment to an official act or to the lack of an official act, then that would make the lines clearer. But even if you can't, in terms of making a credible case for impeachment, you have to get there by showing that Biden materially benefited. And he did. And so now the argument seems to me that Biden is left with, if it's properly prosecuted by Republicans, is I had no idea the source of this money. I asked no questions. I just was a passive recipient of money that's being funneled from my son to my brother to me. I mean, nobody buys that, which is why most Americans have already concluded that this was an influence peddling operation. They're already convinced of it. But to connect the dots and to expose the feebleness of the defense being offered by President Biden specifically is important for political reasons.
No, Dan, you put your finger right on it, right? It's the ignorance defense. I don't know what my son was doing. I don't know what my brother was doing. That's their business. If they were promising that I, Joe Biden, would provide sort of perks or access, I didn't know they were doing that, and I didn't benefit personally. And this is what Joe Biden is going to say.
Yeah, but he can't say I didn't benefit personally anymore. His brother just confirmed he did.
Well, they're playing games with saying that certain transactions
loans,
were loan repayments, right? They're trying to say, and one thing I'll add too, on top of all the Biden brand information that has come out, the idea that I think we're up to $24 million in a 4-year period that flowed to the Biden family, the fact that they went through a dozen or more shell companies, that reeks of money laundering. That reeks of that's exactly how money laundering is conducted. Now, once again, Joe Biden can say, I had no idea these shell companies were set up. These were other members of the family, and I think he's going to stick with that. Look, it reeks of wrongdoing.
On the money laundering piece, that is something where, I mean, there could be a criminal prosecution. And, and it's reminiscent. You may not be familiar with the particulars of this case, but I'm sure you remember it generally. George Ryan, who was the governor of Illinois around the turn of the century, he was elected in 98. He was imprisoned in 03 or 04. It's sort of the trajectory of most governors in Illinois, and should be for most all of them. But anyway, it was one of these. It was basically a money laundering scheme through his campaign committee, and was one of these things where, nobody ever gave him money, but every time he put his hands in his pocket, money was there. And a jury didn't buy I have no idea how that money got there. And certainly I wasn't doing anything improper, and I wasn't, leveraging my office to enrich myself. But nobody believed that because it's not credible. And what you're talking about with the shell companies and what we know from the flow of money through Biden family members, and he's the frickin' vice president of the United States. Now the president of the United States, it's like the reasonable man standard. I mean, come on. There is no way that if you can put together a strong circumstantial case, which I think we're pretty close to, even if you say we're not there yet, that this guy could go down, the family could go down for violation of federal money laundering laws.
Sure. Well, I think Joe Biden's got a couple of tricks in his back pocket. One is that there's no way, even if he's impeached by the House, there's no way two-thirds of the Senate will convict him, right? So he knows that darn well. So the worst that can happen to him politically is this stain of impeachment. The second thing is, if his criminal charges were ever pursued, he'd probably take the Robert Hur defense, which is, look, I'm an old guy, my memory's not so good, and I don't know what was going on. You've already had one special counsel say he's not fit to stand trial. You'd have that again. The third one would be any charges would undoubtedly be federal, and as long as he's in office, he can basically shut down any kind of prosecution or even pardon himself.
No, I'm talking prospectively if he was out of office and there were new U.S. attorneys appointed by a newly minted President Trump, and then you got a different ballgame.
Well, true, except you have to think about the statute of limitations.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Right. Most statute of limitations are 5 years. And so you might be getting to the point where the transactions are so old by the time a subsequent president comes in that they're not prosecutable. Now, we have to look real carefully. It's basically the last transaction would start the clock.
Right, which was last year, Yeah, I mean, and I don't want to get too deep in the weeds here, but no, I agree, and those are all fair points. But you have this ongoing conspiracy, arguably, and there's interactions and financial transactions as recently as last year. So you'll be well within the statute to fold the big guy in, I would think. But I mean, those are all legitimate issues to raise, of course.
Yeah, no, good point. I mean, it's obviously more powerful when Biden is in office. Right, so he kind of, those 4 years when he was out of office, he'll get a lot more of a pass. Right. It's either things that happen when he was vice president, which are getting kind of dated, or, to your point, things that happen when he's in the presidency, because that goes to then the official act point that you made earlier.
What do you think if roles were reversed and this was Trump's family and Don Jr. and Eric Trump and they had a shell company and somehow their family got $24 million? What do you think the reaction would be?
I mean, Amy, look at the Trump family is being prosecuted for a heck of a lot less than that, right? So I think we all know exactly what it would look like. I think they would be going crazy on him. And when you compare what the Bidens have done, both in terms of the magnitude of the amounts of money and the lengths through which they went to hide it, and then you compare that to what Donald Trump is facing in New York, the millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars, for a fraud case where there was no fraud victims, right? Or the Alvin Bragg case coming up where Donald Trump's being prosecuted for hush money payments that he paid out of his own pocket, which might be a little seedy looking, but it's totally legal.
It's legal.
Yeah.
Mark Elias, who is the lawyer, quotation marks, I don't know why there hasn't been an ARDC proceeding against him. He tweeted, and he's also the guy who put together the Steele dossier on behalf of the Clinton campaign. I mean, so he's a complete bottom feeder and trafficker and propaganda. He tweeted out about the vote in that D.C. primary between Haley and Trump. He tweeted out essentially like the small percentage of Trump voters in D.C. and tweeting out sort of laughingly, what's the likelihood that you'll find a Trump voter in this jury pool? And, the attitude of somebody who's an officer of the court to say something like that, like we've got this thing sewn up if he goes to trial in D.C. because of the political demographics of D.C., and then you're part of the group that's saving our democracy. You're part of the group that wants to make sure people have faith in the justice system. And you're saying because we have people who have my party affiliation, they'll do whatever we want.
Well, I think there's many good reasons for people to look at this whole thing and say, look, this just stinks of lawfare, right? The highly selective use of prosecutions, right, that in any case we would know would not be brought. The fact that all of these prosecutions are being brought by elected Democrats, and the fact that they're being brought in very, very selective jurisdictions which will be hostile to Donald Trump, whether it's in New York or whether it's in Fulton County or whether it's here in Washington, D.C. And I think when you look at the totality of that, I think it's very hard to walk away and say, I believe the legal system is being used appropriately here. I think it seems like they're throwing everything at the wall to see what sticks. And I think yesterday's victory for Donald Trump shows that a lot of this is just really desperate. I mean, that 14th Amendment case never had a chance of succeeding, and yet Colorado brought it.
Joseph Moreno, former federal prosecutor with the DOJ and the National Security Division, former staff member with the FBI's 9/11 Review Commission, and a U.S. Army combat veteran, Joseph Moreno. Thank you for joining us. Appreciate it.
Dan, it's always a pleasure.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
It's what Chicago is talking about. It's Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan and Amy on AM 560. The Answer.
The following is a paid political